Thank you for the support over on Patreon, Jesus Ferro. In wake of X-Men Origins Wolverine and WWE wanting to make their own movies, the idea of creating a film combining these two concepts was brought to the table, with WWE looking to make a movie exploring the origins of one of their own intellectual properties, The Undertaker. Now previously, I made an episode pitching one possible story for how this movie could actually be made, and I did so while talking about a method for screenplay writing known as the Freytag Pyramid. But, as mentioned in that original video, this is only one way to write a story, as there are plenty of other methods, and one such alternate method has been employed in writing everything from fantasy stories like Star Wars to situational comedies like Community, and it's also being used as the topic of this episode. Because today, Dave knows a hero's journey. The hero's journey, or the monomyth, has been used for a long time to tell tales of legend, and you'll also notice that it's a pretty common formula to detect once you learn how to break it down. Furthermore, to prove that there's more than one way to tell a tale, I'll be proposing a completely different Undertaker Origins movie than the one that I created last time. So, elements that were leaned on heavily for the previous go-around, such as the Undertaker's father being a central villain, as well as the focus being on Undertaker's family life prior to becoming the Undertaker, will not be included for this go-around. But even though I am changing a lot of core concepts, I will still be adhering to certain self-imposed guidelines, such as making a solid attempt to incorporate as much of the Undertaker's canon that has already been established on WWF TV as I possibly can. And with that being said, certain events like the fire that destroyed the Undertaker's family home, which he believed to have killed his brother Kane, still happened in this version. However, while in the other story this was the finale of the film, in this alternate version, things will begin long after the fire had already happened, which would also mean that Kane, obviously enough, won't be joining today's story. Speaking of characters that won't be making appearances in this version, we also won't be using side characters from the Undertaker's early WWF days like Ted DiBiase and Brother Love. Now, as great as it was to incorporate them into the story, by not using them, this does give us one major advantage. Because as I mentioned last time, one idea that was proposed for the actual movie that was pitched to WWE that they were considering was that the Undertaker Origins film should be a Western. Now in that episode, I simply modified the story so that it would be a modern era version of a Western genre film. But without mortal characters like the $1 Million Man and Brother Love in the story, we can set this in the Old West proper. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's finally get into writing a hero's journey for The Undertaker. Now, a hero's journey, or the monomyth, can be broken down into three main acts: the departure, the initiation, and the return. Each of these acts is broken down into smaller stages, 17 in total for the version we're using today. Which reminds me, I would like to point out that there are many variations on how the hero's journey formula can be broken down. But for today, I'll be using the Campbell version, which is named after Sarah Lawrence College professor of literature, Joseph Campbell, who believed that the hero's journey was the ultimate narrative archetype. Alright, so the first stage in Campbell's hero's journey is the call to action. This is where the hero, in our case the Undertaker, starts off living his everyday, normal, boring life, when all of a sudden he receives a beckoning to go off on an adventure. To establish this, we have to set up what the Undertaker's ordinary world is right at the start of the movie. Now, we already said that this story will take place after the fire, although maybe we could quickly open the film with it as a flashback just to establish tone and then have the rest of the story take place years later. Because establishing tone is crucial for the beginning of a movie. Certain elements like the supernatural can't just come out of left field at the end, because then it would seem out of place. And in this movie, while it is a Western, it also has to be part horror film too. So I would like to have a lot of scary elements brought in as soon as possible. And starting with a gruesome fire is a good way to do so, as well as adding some cryptic sounding dialogue about the Grim Reaper and curses plaguing the Undertaker. Oh, and I would also like to film the movie using certain aesthetics to really get the vibe, like eerie lighting, heavy shadows, and maybe even having some of those shadows moving independently. And of course, spooky music is a total must. But let's get back to the hero's journey. To start with the ordinary life of the Undertaker, or Mark, as is what we'll be calling him for now, let's tie in the wrestling aspect of the character, which is something that I really didn't bring up last time around. So to begin, our hero Mark is a professional fighter out of Texas during the late 1880s. And since rules and regulations were kind of loose at best for professional fights at that time, we don't have to get into anything more specific than just saying that he's a fighter. However, we should make it clear that he's not exactly a successful fighter, as he loses all the time. Sure, he's big, he's strong, but he just can't seem to pick up a win. And local folks say that him and his family are cursed, and that's why the fire happened, and that's why big ol' mean Mark keeps getting beat in the ring. And they also say that if he was really lucky, he would get killed during a match, that way he would be put out of his misery. But then, a mysterious old man dressed all in black confronts Mark and tells him that he knows about the curse that people say has been put upon him, and that it's real. He then displays that he himself does have some magical ability by quickly making a plant wither, or pointing at a spider and making it shrivel, or something ominous, before telling Mark that he knows all about the power of darkness. And that if Mark really wants to break free from his curse once and for all, then he has to compete in a tournament that will feature the most horrifying bouts of his life, where the winner must conquer death itself in order to claim victory and claim the ultimate prize of immortality. And in order to enter this tournament, he must go to none other than Death Valley, California. He offers Mark an invitation to compete, to which Mark replies, no. Because the next part of a hero's journey is known as the Refusal, where the hero rejects the call due to fear, duty, or insecurity, or hey, for our story, why not all three? As at this time, we learn that things aren't all bad, as Mark does have a pretty little blonde wife who stands by his side no matter what and is carrying their first child. And Mark wants his fighting career to pick up, that way he can afford to rebuild his old burnt down home in order to raise his family. So Mark refuses the call because he can't leave his wife in her condition, and on top of that, if he can't beat regular local fighters, what makes him think that he can beat serious foes out in California? Not to mention that he's just plain old scared to leave Texas, where he has his roots. But then he encounters someone else. This part of the story is known as meeting the mentor. This is where a character like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Hagrid comes in to help guide the hero into adventure, and also helps them gain an item in order to help them on their quest, like a lightsaber or a wand. And in this case, while I am cutting out a lot of side characters from the last go-around, one specific character will be returning to fill the role of Mark's mentor, and that character is, of course, Paul Bearer. Now, according to The Undertaker's backstory, which we are keeping intact, Paul worked as an assistant for The Undertaker's parents at their family's funeral home, so we'll just have it that in the years since the fire, the two have kept relatively close. But once he learns about the opportunity out in California, he mentioned how Mark's parents would have always wanted more for him than what he has, and that being a great fighter means conquering fear. So if Mark fears death, then he must conquer Death Valley, and he gives Mark his father's old hat just for luck along his journey. Next in the hero's journey is the stage known as Crossing the First Threshold. This is where the hero agrees to leave his world behind and ventures off into the unknown. This is then followed by the Belly of the Whale, where our hero commences his final separation from his past life and proves that he is now willing to go through a metamorphosis in order to become a hero. For this story, Mark goes off with the man in black and leaves Texas and his pregnant wife behind, telling her that this is the only way that he'll be able to raise money for their family, and he makes Paul promise to look after her while he's away. Then, on their way to California, the man in black tells him his first major piece of advice. He tells him that he knows Mark has been pulling his punches. Mark responds by saying that he really does feel that he and his family are all cursed, so he's scared of hurting somebody seriously in the ring if he goes too far. The man in black assures him that that is not going to be a problem with these opponents that he's about to be facing, and that they won't be showing him any mercy themselves. So if he wants to win, he better unleash it all. And when they finally get to Death Valley, Mark sees his opponents, and all of them look every bit as scary and otherworldly as you can possibly imagine. Mark enters his first fight in the tournament and is still reserved and is getting beat within an inch of his life. But then, facing his own survival, he decides for the first time ever to let go, and he holds nothing back, which leads him to his first ever victory. And with this victory, we conclude the end of the first act, which leads directly into the second, the initiation, which starts with the stage called The Road of Trials, a series of tests that the hero must go through in order to become a hero. And for our story, one by one, we see Mark defeating his opponents, and with each win, he sheds yet another ounce of his fear, but he also sheds another ounce of his own humanity in the process. This stage is then followed by another meeting where he is presented with another talisman that will help him later on in some way. Now this meeting can be with all sorts of figures, a queen of the new world, a powerful being of some sort, but in this case it'll simply be a former champion of the tournament who's the one to present Mark with the talisman, which is none other than the urn that holds the souls of the vanquished from prior tournaments, which then leads to the stage known as the Woman as Tempest. Now this character doesn't have to be a woman, it's just what the stage is called. The point is someone or something has to tempt the hero one last time to return to his old life before his transformation is complete. Now in our case, it is going to be a woman, Mark's wife, who has arrived with Paul to tell Mark to come home, as she reveals that she is no longer with child and that bad things have been happening ever since he left and that she needs him to come back with her. But instead, Mark replies that without a family, he has no reason to come back and he rejects his wife. This is when the Man in Black reappears to tell him that there were always going to be consequences, and that everything does have a cost. Which brings us to the next stage of the hero's journey, the Atonement, where the hero must confront something that holds the ultimate power over his or her life. Oftentimes, it's a father figure of some sort, but it can be anything. It can be a monster, a job, a phobia, something that has control over our hero. And here, we have a lot of options to go with for our story, but I think it would be best if we decided to go with the Man in Black, who decides to reveal himself as none other than the Grim Reaper. He reveals himself to be obsessed with Mark ever since he somehow managed to survive the fire at his family's home, as he just doesn't understand how he was able to do so when it was meant to take him too. And after years of fighting and losing matches that were supposed to kill him, Mark still manages to keep surviving. So the Man in Black has lured him into Death Valley in order to claim his soul once and for all, even telling him to fight harder and more dangerously against his horde of monstrous opponents. But somehow, Mark still lives. And now, the Man in Black has claimed Mark's child in order to tempt him to go to the other side and remove his will to live. He also tricked Mark by having his former champion present him with the Urn, an artifact that was meant to finally claim Mark's soul for the Man in Black, and strip him away of his mysterious ability to live beyond all efforts to the contrary. And with all that being done, at long last, the Man in Black finally kills Mark, and he buries him right where he lay before leaving to revel in his victory. But then, after a few moments, we see Paul Bearer appear, having accompanied Mark's wife. He then goes to where Mark is buried and he sees the Urn. He picks it up, and suddenly, Mark emerges as the Undertaker, a force to be reckoned with, as he now understands that his fear of death is exactly what has held him down all along, as he has always possessed the ability to survive and live beyond that of mortal men, and that the Urn didn't steal his power, it just contained it, concentrated it, and simply removed his emotions, his compassion, and his fear, which only served to make him stronger. And Mark realizes that this power confuses even that of the Grim Reaper himself, and that he shouldn't fear the Reaper, but instead, the Reaper should fear the Undertaker. And that would be the next two stages in the story. The Apotheosis, where the hero comes to a major revelation and is ready for his greatest test, which then goes to the next stage, which is called the Ultimate Boon, where the hero achieves his goal and completes his quest. And having realized his power and removing his fear, Apotheosis is achieved. Then, by returning from the Great Beyond and being ready to vanquish his true enemy, his ultimate boon is the power of immortality, which is exactly what he set out to achieve in the first place. And with both of those out of the way, this is where we enter the final phase of the journey, the return. At first, the hero refuses to return, having no desire to go back to his old life with a family that he was never meant to have, especially now that he's become, well, something else. However, just as he needed some help in deciding to go on his journey in the first place, he also needs some assistance in coming back from it. And so Paul Bearer steps in yet again to tell him that the Man in Black wants to take everything from Mark and that his wife is next. And it's only going to get worse once he finds out that Mark is still alive. And Paul says that even if he doesn't love her anymore, he can't let her suffer any further consequences just because of him. And this leads to the crossing of the return threshold, where the hero returns with all of the power he attained during his quest, and is going back to his home in order to use his now fully unleashed power in order to defeat his enemy and protect his innocent wife. Then, by defeating the Grim Reaper, he becomes the master of two worlds, leaving us with the last stage in a hero's journey, the freedom to live, where after conquering the fear of death, the hero, in turn, is finally free to live. Well, there you go. What do you think of a hero's journey, and how do you feel about an Undertaker Origins movie? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to support me over on Patreon and help keep this channel going, just like Jesus Pharaoh, The Woos, and Richard Lee. Thanks so much, guys, and as always, Dave knows.